The crystal chandeliers of the St. Gregory Hotel cast dancing reflections across the marble floor as Manhattan's elite gathered for the charity gala of the season. At the center of it all stood Donovan and Genevieve Hawthorne, a portrait of dynastic success that made other power couples seem ordinary by comparison. Donovan Hawthorne was the titan everyone wanted to be. At 45, he commanded Vidian Dynamics, a logistics empire that had revolutionized North American freight in less than 15 years. Tonight, resplendent in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, he held court by the champagne fountain like a king surveying his domain. There I was, he gestured dramatically to his captivated audience. Just a kid with a beat-up truck and an impossible dream. I slept in that cab for 6 months, living on nothing but coffee and pure determination. No trust fund, no silver spoon, just raw, unadulterated hustle. The crowd hung on every word. Business magazines had crowned him a visionary, a self-made maverick who'd built his empire from sheer grit and genius. It was the kind of rags-to-riches story that America loved to celebrate. 20 feet away, Genevieve watched her husband's performance with the detached interest of a theater critic, draped in deep sapphire silk that matched the cool intelligence. In her eyes, she was the epitome of understated elegance, beautiful in a quiet, unobtrusive way that served as the perfect backdrop to his brilliance. Her champagne flute remained untouched as she observed the familiar ritual. With each telling, Donovan's truck grew more dilapidated, his coffee more bitter, his struggle more heroic. The part he always omitted, the source of the money for that first beat-up truck, which had actually been a fleet of 5 brand-new Kenworth T680s, hung in the air like an unspoken secret. Her gaze shifted to the blonde woman at Donovan's side. Brooke Jennings, his executive assistant, stood wrapped in adoration, her razor-sharp ambition barely concealed beneath her worshipful exterior. 20 years younger, with a sleek bob that seemed to defy gravity, she looked at Donovan not as a boss, but as a god of commerce. And Donovan, in turn, seemed to bask in her worship, his posture straightening, his voice growing even more resonant under her admiring gaze. Genevieve had seen that look before. It was the same way he used to look at her, back when she was his entire world, before she had become just another beautiful, familiar piece of furniture in it. The drive home later that evening, as their chauffeured car swept through the glittering city streets, a heavy silence settled between them. Donovan loosened his bow tie. His attention fixed on the flashing lights of the metropolis he considered his personal kingdom. "You were quiet tonight," he noted without looking at her, his tone carrying the faintest edge of criticism. "I was listening," Genevieve replied, her voice soft as silk. "Your story gets better with every telling." He finally turned to her, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. "It's what people want to hear, Genevieve. Inspiration. It's part of the brand." "Our brand, you mean?" The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. "Of course," he said quickly, though his dismissive tone suggested otherwise. He reached over and patted her hand, a perfunctory gesture that felt more like marking territory than showing affection. "You look stunning tonight, by the way. The perfect hostess." It was meant as a compliment, but it landed in her chest like a stone. Hostess, accessory, brand asset, the roles she had willingly played for 15 years, believing they were partners in building something magnificent together. Now she saw them for what they truly were, the gilded bars of a cage she had helped construct around herself. The confession. Their modernist mansion on Willow Creek Lane stood dark and silent as they arrived home, a mausoleum of their shared history. As Genevieve began ascending the grand floating staircase, Donovan's voice stopped her cold. "Jen, wait." She turned, her hand resting on the cool metal of the railing. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, bathed in moonlight filtering through, the floor-to-ceiling windows. For just a moment, he looked like the man she had fallen in love with. the passionate, driven dreamer instead of the polished CEO. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his earlier bravado stripped away. Genevieve's heart, a muscle long trained in the art of stillness, began to beat a frantic rhythm. She knew with crystalline certainty what was coming next. She had seen the signs for months, the late nights at the office, the hushed phone calls, the scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his suit jackets. "I've been unhappy for a long time," he began with the classic coward's preamble. "We've grown apart. We want different things. This life, it's not enough for me anymore." She remained silent, her expression unmoving, granting him no assistance, no emotional release. He faltered under her steady gaze, then forced himself to continue. "I've met someone," he finally choked out. "It's Brooke, and I'm in love with her." There it was, the banal, predictable betrayal laid bare in their multi-million-dollar foyer. "I want a divorce, Genevieve," he said, the words echoing in the vast space. He took a steadying breath, his confidence returning now that the worst was over. He was switching back into CEO mode, the deal maker, the man who always came out on top. "I'll be fair, of course," he continued, as if discussing a corporate merger. "I'll have my lawyer draw up a generous settlement. You'll be very comfortable. You won't have to worry about a thing." For the first time that evening, Genevieve allowed her expression to shift. The placid mask dissolved, replaced by a look of profound, almost pitying clarity. He saw her as a cost to be managed, a line item, in the dissolution of their partnership. He believed the empire was his to divide, his to grant her a small piece of out of the goodness of his heart. She descended a single step, her eyes locking onto his with laser focus. "Donovan," she said, her voice no longer soft but forged from something ancient and hard as steel. "You have no idea what you've just done." He mistook her words for the threat of an ugly emotional scene. He was prepared for tears, for screaming, for pleas. He was not prepared for the quiet, chilling resolve in her voice. "Don't worry about your lawyer, Donovan," she said, turning and continuing up the stairs without a backward glance. "I'll be in touch with mine." He stood alone at the bottom of the staircase, a king in a castle of his own making, utterly oblivious to the fact that he had never, not for a single day, held the deed. The settlement offer. A week later, the official divorce papers landed on the antique mahogany desk in Genevieve's home office. She read the cold, formal language with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a tumor. In recognition of her non-financial contributions to the marital union, a generous and final settlement waives any and all future claims to Vidian Dynamics and all associated assets. $15 million. To most people, it would represent unimaginable wealth. To Donovan, it was a rounding error, less than 1% of his net worth. The woman who had shared his bed for 15 years, who had built a life around supporting his dreams, was being dismissed with pocket change. She didn't get angry. The time for that kind of raw emotion had passed the night he had spoken Brooke's name. What she felt now was something far more dangerous, a cold, clarifying focus. He had not only betrayed their marriage, he had tried to erase her, to retroactively edit her out of their shared history and reduce her to a footnote in his heroic biography. He believed he was the author of his own success story. Genevieve folded the letter with precise movements, then reached for her phone. She didn't call one of those society divorce lawyers who specialized in quiet, dignified surrenders. Instead, she dialed a number she hadn't used in years, one that would help her reclaim the truth that had been buried beneath 15 years of lies. It was time for Donovan to learn that his entire origin story was a work of fiction. He thought he was the author of his own success, but the truth was she had been the ghostwriter for the entire novel, and now she was going to reveal the real story. One document, one wire transfer, one devastating revelation at a time. The perfect facade was about to crumble, and the woman he had tried to discard was going to teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. Never underestimate the fury of a woman whose life's work you've mistaken for a doormat. The Hunter. The offices of Finch and Sterling were the antithesis of the glass and steel palace where Donovan's lawyer, Gideon Wolfe, held court. Located in a beautifully restored brownstone, they were filled with ancient books, antique maps, and the quiet hum of intellectual rigor. Audrey Finch was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind unfashionable but practical glasses and silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. She didn't handle divorces. She was a specialist in forensic accounting and complex corporate litigation, known for her meticulous attention to detail and her ability to untangle the most knotted financial histories. "Genevieve," Audrey said, warmly as she welcomed her into the sunlit, book-lined office. "It's been too long. I was so sorry to hear about your grandmother." "She always spoke so highly of you, Audrey," Genevieve replied. "She said you were the only person she trusted to understand the intricacies of her estate." Genevieve's maternal grandmother, Helena Reed, had been the source of the family's quiet, immense wealth, not from oil or steel, but from shrewd early investments in technology, pharmaceuticals, and art, managed with a discretion that bordered on secrecy. When she passed away, she had left the bulk of her fortune to her only granddaughter, along with a lifetime of lessons. Stay invisible. Trust no one completely. And understand that money is a tool, not an identity. Genevieve placed Donovan's settlement letter on Audrey's desk. "He's filed for divorce." Audrey read the document, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she removed her glasses and polished them slowly. "$15 million, she said softly. "He considers that benevolent. He believes he built his company from scratch," Genevieve explained. "He thinks I was just a curator at the Wallace Gallery when we met, making $40,000 a year." "And were you?" Audrey asked, her eyes sharp. "I was," Genevieve confirmed. "I enjoyed the work, and it was the perfect cover." Audrey leaned back, a flicker of a smile crossing her face. "The Nightingale Trust." Genevieve nodded. "The Nightingale Trust." The Secret Empire. The Nightingale Trust was Genevieve's masterpiece, a financial vehicle she had created under Audrey's guidance years ago, shortly after her grandmother's death. It was an offshore entity layered with shell corporations and intermediaries, so opaque as to be virtually untraceable. It was the instrument of her silent partnership in her own husband's life. "He's about to learn," Genevieve said, steel returning to her voice, "that his entire origin story is a work of fiction. He thinks he's the author of his own success. The truth is, I was the ghostwriter for the entire novel." Audrey put her glasses back on, and the forensic accountant, the corporate litigator, was back. In her place was a hunter who had just caught the scent of her prey. "So," Audrey said, a thrill in her voice, "let's begin the audit, shall we? I want every wire transfer, every stock purchase agreement, every single dollar that flowed from Nightingale into Vidian Dynamics. We are not going to ask for a larger settlement, Genevieve." She leaned forward, her eyes glinting. "We are going to prove ownership." The paper trail. The discovery process revealed a devastating truth, document by document. Working late into the night, fueled by determination and shared purpose, Genevieve and Audrey excavated the buried financial history of Vidian Dynamics. Here was the initial wire transfer, dated August 2010, $2 million. It wasn't sent from Genevieve Hawthorne, but from a venture capital firm called North Star Holdings, a name she had invented one evening while looking at the stars. North Star Holdings was a shell corporation owned by another entity called the Albion Group, which was in turn an asset of the Nightingale Trust. The money had landed in Donovan's fledgling company account like manna from heaven. He had been ecstatic. "You won't believe it, Jen," he had shouted over the phone, his voice electric with joy. A VC firm out of Delaware heard the buzz. They believe in me. He'd never questioned it. His ego was so vast, so all-consuming, that it simply accepted this windfall as its due. He was a genius, and of course anonymous smart money would find its way to him. 2 years later came another crisis. A competitor had slashed prices and Vidian was on the verge of bankruptcy. Then another miracle, a different entity, a European investment fund named Argentum Investments, swept in with a $5 million capital infusion. Genevieve looked at the paperwork now, her signature on the internal Nightingale Trust authorization form, a stark testament to the truth. She remembered Donovan's relief, how he'd wept in her arms that night. "We're saved, Jen. Someone out. There has faith in me." He never noticed that both North Star and Argentum had no physical offices, no public-facing partners, and had dissolved shortly after making their single strategic investments in his company. The deposition Gideon Wolfe had decided a deposition was necessary. It was standard tactics: put the opposing party in a sterile conference room, grill them under oath, and hope they break down emotionally. He was confident he could dismantle Genevieve Hawthorne. She was just a soft, pampered society wife who would crumble under pressure. The deposition took place at Gideon's firm. Donovan was present at his lawyer's request, projecting an aura of bored magnanimity, a king granting an audience to a disgruntled former subject. Genevieve entered with Audrey, dressed not in a power suit, but in a simple, elegant gray dress. She looked composed, calm, utterly unruffled. She took her seat opposite Gideon, ignoring Donovan's presence completely. "Mrs. Hawthorne," Gideon began, his voice dripping with condescension, "let's talk about your contributions to the marriage. You manage the household staff, correct?" "Yes." "You planned social events, parties, fundraisers?" "Yes." "You oversaw the decoration and renovation of your homes?" "Yes." "All very important work, to be sure," Gideon said with a smirk. "But you would agree that you did not participate in the day-to-day operations of Vidian Dynamics?" "That's not correct," Genevieve said calmly. Gideon paused, surprised. Donovan shifted in his seat. "Oh? And what was your role?" "I was an investor," she said. Gideon laughed out loud. "An investor? Mrs. Hawthorne, your bank statements show no such investments." "My personal bank statements would not show those transactions," she replied, her gaze steady. "Right," Gideon said, rolling his eyes. "Let's move on to the company's founding. You're aware of your husband's famous story, starting the company with nothing but a single truck and sheer determination?" "I am aware of the story he tells," Genevieve said, subtle emphasis on the last word. "And you don't dispute it?" "I dispute its accuracy." Donovan could no longer stay silent. "What the hell is she talking about?" he muttered to Gideon. "In what way is it inaccurate, Mrs. Hawthorne?" Gideon pressed. "Vidian Dynamics was not started with one truck," Genevieve said, her voice clear and precise. "It was started with a fleet of 5 new Kenworth T680s and a 1-year prepaid lease on a 20,000-square-foot warehouse in the industrial park off Route 7. Donovan stared at her, his jaw slack. He hadn't thought about the specific model of those trucks in 15 years. How could she possibly remember that? "And where do you allege the capital for these assets came from?" Gideon asked, recovering. "It came from an initial seed investment of $2 million from a venture capital firm called North Star Holdings." Donovan's head snapped up. "Ask my husband," Genevieve said, turning her eyes on Donovan for the first time, "to name a single human person he ever met from North Star Holdings. Ask him for a phone number, an email address, or the physical address of their office." Gideon looked at Donovan, who was suddenly pale. "It was all done remotely," Donovan stammered. "They were based in Delaware. It was different times. Very standard for venture capital." Audrey Finch chose this moment to speak. "Actually, that's highly non-standard. A $2 million seed investment would involve multiple face-to-face meetings, extensive due diligence, and a board seat for the investor, none of which ever happened. Audrey opened a slim file folder. Let's move to 2012. Vidian was facing a liquidity crisis, weathered by a $5 million capital infusion from Argentum Investments. Can you name a single person you dealt with at Argentum, Mr. Hawthorne? Did you ever visit their offices? In Geneva? Donovan's face was a mask of confusion and anger. No, it was handled through an investment bank. This is ridiculous. Audrey slid a single piece of paper across the table to Gideon. A corporate registration document showing that North Star Holdings and Argentum Investments, despite being registered in different hemispheres at different times, shared a single common director. Who is this director? Gideon asked, cold dread pooling in his stomach. That, Audrey said, standing up, is a question we are saving for the courtroom. This deposition is over. The courtroom revelation. The courtroom was a theater of quiet hostility. Donovan sat flanked by Gideon Wolfe and a team of junior associates, trying to project calm authority while a vein pulsed visibly in his temple. Brooke sat in the front row, having traded her assistant blazers for the demure pastels of a future corporate wife. On the other side sat Genevieve, serene next to the unassuming Audrey Finch. No junior associates, no flanks of lawyers, just the two of them and thick, leather-bound binders. After Gideon presented his case, Donovan, the singular genius, charts of spectacular growth, media clippings praising his vision, it was Audrey's turn. The petitioner calls Mr. Donovan Hawthorne to the stand. Donovan strode to the witness box, a flicker of his old confidence returning. This was his home turf. Time to tell his story, the one that had captivated investors and journalists for years. Mr. Hawthorne, Audrey began with academic curiosity. Could you please tell the court the story of the founding of Vidian Dynamics? Donovan launched into his familiar narrative. I started with nothing but an idea and willingness to outwork everyone. I bought an old truck, slept in the cab, made sales calls from payphones. It was the definition of a bootstrap operation. A truly inspiring story, Audrey said flatly. Let's talk about that old truck. Was it in fact an old truck, or was it a fleet of 5 brand-new Kenworth T680s? It may have been more than one vehicle, Donovan mumbled. It was a long time ago. It was 5, was it not? And you had a prepaid warehouse lease. All told, your initial capital assets were around $2 million, secured from North Star Holdings. Audrey handed documents to Donovan, the clerk, and Gideon. Please confirm these. Relate to your seed investment. Yes, this proves my point, Donovan said desperately. Does it? Audrey asked softly. You see, North Star Holdings was a shell corporation. No employees, no office, no other investments. Created July 1st, 2010, dissolved September 30th, 2010, just 2 weeks after transferring funds to you. A murmur went through the courtroom. North Star Holdings was wholly owned by the Albion Group, which was in turn a designated asset of a trust established in 2009. Are you familiar with the Nightingale Trust, Mr. Hawthorne? Donovan stared blankly. No, Your Honor, Audrey announced, turning to face the judge. The Nightingale Trust was the sole source of the $2 million that founded Vidian Dynamics. She continued systematically. The 2012 cash flow crisis, saved by Argentum Investments, also controlled by Nightingale Trust. The 2015 software development funding from Pacific Rim Ventures, another shell of Nightingale. The 2018 $50 million fleet expansion, again, Nightingale, funneled through yet another entity. Her voice rose with each revelation. Every time your company needed capital to grow, every single time it was on the verge of failure or ready for expansion, this mysterious Nightingale was there. Over $150 million across 15 years, all from the same source. The courtroom was dead silent. And who, Audrey asked, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade, is the sole beneficiary and controller of the Nightingale Trust? She produced a final document, the original trust agreement, signed in elegant script. Mrs. Genevieve Hawthorne. The truth unveiled. The courtroom erupted. Donovan's face went white, then red, then white again. Brooke's mouth fell open in shock. Gideon Wolfe looked like a man who had just watched his career implode in real time. But Genevieve sat perfectly still, her expression serene, as 15 years of secrets finally came to light. "Your Honor," Audrey continued over the chaos, "Mrs. Hawthorne didn't just contribute to the marriage. She funded, structured, and saved Vidian Dynamics at every crucial juncture. She is not seeking alimony. She is claiming what was always hers, ownership of the company she built." Donovan tried to stand, tried to speak, but no words came. The self-made man, the bootstrap billionaire, the visionary CEO, it had all been a lie, a performance funded by the woman he was trying to discard. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order, but the damage was done. Genevieve finally stood, her movements graceful and deliberate. For the first time in 15 years, she was no longer invisible. She was no longer the perfect backdrop to his brilliance. She was the architect, and he had been nothing more than the face she had chosen to represent her creation. Epilogue. The new beginning. 6 months later, Genevieve Hawthorne sat in the CEO's office of Vidian Dynamics, her rightful place at last. The court had ruled decisively. She owned 87% of the company she had secretly built. Donovan had been awarded a generous severance package, exactly $15 million. He and Brooke had quietly relocated to a smaller city, where he struggled to rebuild his reputation, and she discovered that loving a fallen king was far different from worshiping a successful one. Genevieve had kept the Hawthorne name, not for him, but for the company. She ran it with the same quiet brilliance she had always possessed, finally free to step out of the shadows and into the light she had always deserved. The business world had been shocked by the revelation, but they quickly adapted. After all, she had been the secret power behind the throne all along, and sometimes, late at night in her office, Genevieve would look out at the city lights and smile. Not the careful, practiced smile of a corporate wife, but the satisfied smile of a woman who had finally reclaimed her own story. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, they said. But they were wrong. Hell hath no fury like a woman whose life's work you've mistaken for a doormat, and who has the receipts to prove it.